Welcome to another exciting episode of Car Smarts Radio. My name is Steve Safier. Thank you so much for tuning in to 610 ESPN or WOND 1400. If you're listening via podcast on 610ESPN.com, thank you so much for pushing play and listening to the show. All the old shows are available at 610ESPN.com. Go to the Car Smarts banner and then hit podcast, and you'll get all the old shows, man, the whole year's worth of shows. Well, if you're like me and remember your first car with fond memories and often contemplate about where that car is today, then you're going to love today's show because it's all about lost cars, specifically lost muscle cars. And our guest today has written a book on the topic. In fact, it's called Lost Muscle Cars, 45 Stories of Hunting the Most Elusive and Valuable Muscle Cars. Wes Eisenshank is calling in from Minnesota today. Welcome to the show, Wes.
Steve, great to chat with you. How are you today?
Pretty good. How's the weather in Minnesota today?
Oh, it's a sparkling 39 degrees, so it might be Christmas light weather.
Oh, it's pretty chilly here too. Now, Wes, you also run a Facebook page called Lost Muscle Cars where people can post information about the car that got away in hopes that someone will see the post and maybe have information on the car. Is that right?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. It's a Facebook page that we started right at the beginning process of creating the book. And it was used in part to inspire people to tell their stories and then also maybe select a few of those to add to the manuscript. So we ended up with 45 stories that you had covered here in the beginning of the intro.
Yeah. And we're going to get into greater detail about that, but I want to hear a little bit about you. Let's find out about Wes. Where are you from? What do you do? And how did you come to write a book on muscle cars?
So I grew up in central Minnesota, and my dad always had a car sitting in the driveway, whether it was an Impala or a 63-year-old Chevy pickup. But my roots of loving the automobile, I'm 42 years old, but I remember being about 3 years old and riding with my grandpa in a parade in a small town called Eden Valley, Minnesota, where they had an annual parade, and my grandpa had a couple pair of old Fords, in the late 40s Fords, and sitting there throwing candy out, I always wondered why were people staring at these vehicles and making comments about them. And to me, a car had always just been a car. But at that point, it really kind of started the seed of really liking old cars.
Mm-hmm. And at some point, you a coworker or something. There's a story in the book about a Barracuda. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my coworker Pete was standing some base and casing across the table from me, and we'd been chatting about his 1966 Barracuda Formula S, and he had found a gas receipt in the carpet. It had slipped between the rocker molding and the carpet, and he had a name on there, and it was signed a name he couldn't quite read because it was in cursive. But I think it was almost 5 or 6 years later. I had talked to him about bringing that piece of paper back in, and I really started investigating into his Barracuda, and we ended up really getting lucky and finding out this person's name, and through Google searching at the time, and I think I ended up subscribing to one of those peoplesearches.com or whatever, and
right.
and we had 15 or 20 people with that name, but I ended up calling them all. We ended up not making a contact there, but through a little bit more research, we found a person with that name who had been attending MIT up in Massachusetts.
Wow.
And it really coincided with when that paper had slipped between that carpet and rocker molding. So we found out he was an engineer in California. I ended up emailing him a few times to no success. I sent him some snail mail. And lo and behold, he responded back noting that was his 66 Barracuda. He hadn't had heard of the car since maybe 68, 69.
Wow.
And we connected Pete and the past owner, and for the first time ever, the past owner had a photo of his old Barracuda. Pete sent him a photo of it. So yeah, it was really gratifying to put two people together like that, people who didn't know they were searching for each other, and really connecting the whole history of the car.
And that sort of sparked your interest in maybe learning about other stories out there, and we'll talk about how the internet obviously plays a role in that. But when did you realize you had enough stories or leads to put it in a book?
So I've been with two publishing companies in my life, Motor Books out of Minneapolis and also CarTech Books out of Forest Lake, Minnesota. And with those two companies, you get a vast array of muscle car knowledge when, each place was publishing 20 to 30 books annually just geared towards the muscle car. And they're really searching for niches in the hobby to create new content with. So by the time I had reached CarTech 5 years ago, I had studied up on everything Holman Moody and Ford Racing and, Copos and Chevrolets and GM Muscle, that I had heard my share of, whatever happened to this car stories. So between all of that and then also starting here at CarTech, I was able to sort of put together, I feel like a murderer's row of really important, significant muscle cars that either no longer here or are sort of like cars with amnesia. They don't know their history.
Right.
And yeah, we were able to fire off 45 of them, and my gosh, we just realized we just nicked the top of the iceberg, and there's a lot more out there and people searching for the cars. That's
right. Some of the book, we're going to talk about the individual cars in the book. A lot of them are famous or semi-famous, regionally famous cars. But there's probably, there's hundreds of stories. I even posted, a picture of my car on your Facebook page in hopes that somebody would know where this old Trans Am is. But of all the stories in the book, is there, again, we're going to talk about specific cars. Do you have a favorite story?
Yeah, some of them are, for me, favorite would include, providing a bit of information to the public that they've never heard before. And we'd always had heard that there were 4 1970 Twister Rancheros, and they were 351 4-barrel cars, but none had ever surfaced. So I really put my nose to it, and I got together with Kevin Marty and was able to work with him on determining there were only 2, and they were both 429 Super Cobra Jet cars. And that is a pretty significant muscle car, and with only 2, there's a good chance in them being trucks as well that they might not have survived.
Right.
But putting those stories of those 2 Twister Rancheros into Lost Muscle Cars actually yielded one of the cars.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, one of the individuals who had a copy of the book was able to use all the details provided in the book. And upon going, answering a Craigslist ad, he went to a rural farm, and lo and behold, the Twister Ranchero was sitting right there in the field. And he was able to make the purchase, and we've no longer, we've scratched one of the Twister Rancheros off the missing list. And for me, when I'm thinking about significant stories in that book, something that really provides new information to the public, and then also ends up with, yielding the find, that just becomes, one of your favorite stories no matter what.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, the funny thing is, first of all, I want to say that I don't know what percentage, but a lot of the cars that you feature in the book are still lost. They're still out there somewhere, or they're just disappeared. And so if you're a car sleuth and interested, I recommend getting this book. And if you're hunting down some of those that are still out there in the world. And the other thing that you mentioned in the book is that these cars weren't collectible at the time. And so people just treated them, like you said, like the Rancheros were probably used as farm trucks and not really thought of as anything special. And we look back now 30, 40, 50 years later, and wow, it's one of 2 or one of 10 or one of 50. They're pretty collectible.
Yeah, it's true. It's hard to mention, or it's hard to fathom, a significant racer from back in the day, a Ronnie Sachs or a Grumpy Jenkins, having one of these cars, or a Hubert Platt, and then the car sort of morphing into, 2, 3, 5 years after that racer last raced it, morphing it into either a bracket race car or even converted to street usage.
Right.
And then having multiple paint jobs done, and really the car loses its history once that process begins. And it's only through maybe records existing of Chevrolet selling a car to Grumpy Jenkins for $1
Right.
or something of that nature. If records don't come forth, now you end up with the problem of, even if you do have the car, proving that it was Grumpy Jenkins.
Right.
So, when you are searching for one of these lost muscle cars, and that's what's so great about the book, is everyone has a chip chair and a chance. It might be your neighbor with Grumpy Jenkins Nova in his garage. It's just restored to back to its 327 power plant, L79 driven the Nova.
The Nova too, right?
Yeah. So it's one of those things where time really takes a toll on some of these cars, and again, some of them in the book may not have survived. We actually just got confirmation here within the last couple months that Hubert Platt's 67 Fairlane ended up in a rollover accident, a trailer towing rollover accident. And we'd gotten the car forward with the story further than anyone had ever gotten it. And we finally got in touch with the guy. His name was Jim Morton, who had the car last. And Jim was the one who confirmed that the car ended up, being totaled in a rollover. But, I think the rear end survived and maybe the hood. So there's still those nostalgia pieces out there that could be salvaged and attributed to a tribute car.
That's right. And as you said, some of them were street cars converted to race cars, and then race cars back to street cars and modified and changed, and the hoods were changed and the engines may have been replaced. But there's still, what are some of the things you look for? I mean, are there stampings on cars, other evidence that says this was maybe Hubert Platt's car or Grumpy Jenkins' car? What are some of the little things after a car has been heavily modified or changed that help you and others decide that this is the actual car, besides VIN number, obviously?
Yeah, VIN number would be probably the most important component, but visual cues of a surviving old tired car. So if a car that's been parked for multiple decades, what you wanted to do is go back and look at historic photos of that car if they exist. So if it's a famous race car, it's very unlikely they're going to strip that car down to bare metal to repaint it. It's going to likely have signs underneath any existing paint of that old paint job. A case in point here is within the last month and a half or so, I was able to find CarCraft 1201, the first Boss 429 prototype, and we were able to determine it was the car when we pulled the fender and saw the serial number up on the top. But also, the car had a repaint, and underneath that paint still is the original paint. And they taped, stuff like the remnants of the leftover side striping. It started life as a Mach 1.
Right.
The side striping was still in the inside of the door jamb. So, and that's another thing too with the Boss Bronco, another vehicle we were able to find here 2-3 years ago. When I sold it to a Ford collector in Wisconsin, and when he began the refurbishing process of the vehicle, he found this original striping of that Boss Bronco in the door jamb as well. So yeah, absolutely, there are telltale signs and clues. What you'd be looking for would be any kind of modifications to the bodywork, or painting over of old paint, and stuff like I've heard. Richard, like when Richard Petty's cars have been found, he always had these kind of a halo stamping above his headrest. So there's always little tricks of the trade, and backtracking through ownership history at times can be difficult, but it can get you to that place too.
That's right. And what people might not know is that old cars you can't go on Carfax, and put in the VIN and find all the information of previous owners and things like that, like you can with modern cars. So it takes a little bit more work. Where did you find this Boss 429 prototype? I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. Interesting enough, there was a classified, or it was a listing on the Corvajet forum. And he had posted the Marty report for the car, and the Marty report shows the car as an introductory show unit. So I've been sharing information about the car. It's
Mm-hmm.
no secret. The VIN is NF02R100031. So it's the 31st consecutive unit number assigned to a Mustang in 1969.
Wow.
And he had this Marty report on there, and it listed as an introductory show unit. And suffice to say, we were working on a book at the time called The History of Cobra Jet. So I was doing a lot of research on Cobra Jet equipped cars, and I really wanted to feature an introductory show unit. Well, once I was able to purchase the car, I really dug into the researching what the introductory show unit aspect was, and we uncovered a book from 1981 written by Stephen Strange. And Stephen Strange wrote a book on the Boss 429s, and he left 7 serial numbers in there for all the first CarCraft cars. So CarCraft 1201 through CarCraft 1207.
Right.
The serial numbers are in the book.
Okay.
Coupling that with a book we've done on the history of CarCraft and old documentation that shows the serial number on their paperwork, we were able to conclude it was the first Boss 429 prototype. Now, suffice to
Wes,
say again...
Hey, Wes, let me stop you there. I want to take a little break there.
For sure.
Hold on to that story, though. When we come back, we'll get more into the book, talk about each chapter, individual cars, which have been found and which are still missing, right after these messages on Car Smarts Radio.
Wait in person. Classic Auto Mall, the newest and quite possibly the largest classic car facility in the world, conveniently located just an hour west of Philadelphia on the Pennsylvania Turnpike in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. You can check us out on the web at classicautomall.com or reach us by phone at 888-227-0914. Come visit us at the Classic Auto Mall in Morgantown. You won't be disappointed.
4 degrees. That was Philadelphia's coldest day of the year in 2018. Imagine not having a warm winter coat on that day. That's how 175,000 children, yes children, in our area felt. Help us, the Auto Dealers Caring for Kids Foundation, change that. A $20 donation to our Driving Away the Cold program will provide a brand new winter coat to a local child in need. We believe warmth should never be a luxury, and we hope you do too. Please give today at morethanautodealers.com.
And welcome back to Car Smarts Radio. I'm Steve Saffier. We're talking with Wes Eisenschenk, author of Lost Muscle Cars. You'll find a link to his book on the website, carsmartsradio.com, or you can go to cartechbooks.com. We were talking about the Boss 429 prototype, and you also mentioned a Boss Bronco. I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, it's part of the perks of working at a publishing company like CarTech Books. And when you're working on a book called CarCraft, and you're able to view these documents that others in the world aren't privy to, you get a little bit of a running head start on hunting some of these cars down. But yeah, it's research. It really comes down to research. I mean, everybody can be given the same information. It's what you do with it, and who you're looking to contact to get in touch with the people who might have more information on the car. And like you said, as soon as I posted that I had CarCraft 1201 on the Cobra Jet forum, it brought out all these additional people who had paperwork on my car.
Wow.
And it was amazing to see some of the things that my car had been used for. Even after CarCraft at Ford Motor Company, we had received paperwork now that the car was sent to a gentleman by the name of Paul Shedlick, who was in the Ford Design Studio, and he was a fabricator. And what's significant about that is Paul used that car, CarCraft 1201, to create the mold for Ohio George Montgomery's 1969 gasser car. So it keeps compounding upon itself when you are able to get a story like this out into the public, and using your site as well to share more information about these cars. And every listener on here, there might just be one listener tuning in that's going to have information on a car maybe on my website, or another person's missing car that they're hunting for. So, yeah, the Boss Bronco as well was a vehicle that appeared on an inventory sheet at CarCraft, and the Bronco was again for sale publicly on eBay, but it had too lost its history. You know, it's unclear if Ford removed the Boss striping on the vehicle or not, but by the time the Bronco had made it to 2017, it was still a very nicely used vehicle, but hiding in plain sight, so to say. It had the Boss Cougar scoop on it still. It had the strop roll cage in it. It had a 351 powered Shelby engine and an automatic transmission. All these things were not applicable to the Ford Bronco in 1969. So if you would see it, you would think, wow, that's a really nice day 2 build. You know, how cool is that? But it's, you know, it's that paperwork that helps confirm these things and as to why they exist.
Wow, that's just fascinating. I wonder if Ford will make a high performance version of the new Bronco coming out. Well, who knows? There's a lot of aftermarket companies now chomping at the bit, waiting for something like that. So
we've already started seeing tributes to the Boss Bronco at car shows. So it's starting.
Very cool. So let's go through the book a little bit by sort of category. And the first one is concept, prototype, and promotional vehicles. These were vehicles, sometimes one-offs, that were created either to garner public opinion or to showcase features of a future car, but many went to the crusher. Why did they go to the crusher?
They weren't safe for usage for the road, for the public consumption. Most of them would have had some sort of welding or prototype work done to them, so they weren't safe for usage. Now, Ford was a little different. You know, some of their vehicles had leaked through backdoor channels and made it into the public. Chevrolet, it's very, very, very few and far between when you find something prototype Chevrolet out there. One of the best examples is the Pete Estes 68 Z28 Camaro convertible that made it out into this world. But for the most part, Chevrolet kept a really good. They had everything under lock and key, whereas Ford had this back channel resale lot where prototypes sometimes snuck out. But yeah, we try to be as diverse as possible with covering the prototypes from the different manufacturers in the book.
Right, and so some were not destroyed; they were hidden by designers and just tucked away or forgotten. One that comes to mind that really, I think, turned things around for Barrett Jackson was in 2007 when the 1954 F88 Olds concept car, it looked like a Corvette, was sold, and it was a big deal. It went for $3.2 million. It still exists actually in a museum in Colorado, and so some of these prototypes are still around. You can't drive them on the street, as you said, because some things may have been taken out of the car, removed, changed, safety features changed, welds that would not be safe on the street. But they're still there and still tucked away. Some of them are still unaccounted for. Let's see. There's the 1968 Shelby GT350, which was in France, was for a time was gold, I remember. And you said somewhere it may be in Central African Republic, wherever that is.
Yeah, the CAR.
Right.
This was a fun story to put together because there was a website, I believe it's called coralsnake.com, and he's a Shelby enthusiast, and he had very little information on the car other than an old black and white from a newspaper clipping. I ended up doing a lot of research on this car, and I connected with a gentleman in France, and we ended up using Google Translate to communicate back and forth.
Wow.
And it was his father who was at that trade show in '68. I believe it was I forget the name of the show, but it was the big France Auto Show, and he had some amazing color photos his dad had taken of this Shelby. And we were able to move the story forward again. And yeah, it sounds like the car ended up in, I believe, the Central African Republic, which no longer exists,
right,
and is morphed into another country. but yeah, that's one of those where you you better have your gun belt on tight if you're going to go hunting for it, I'm guessing.
It's somewhere in the Serengeti somewhere. So if you've got the
Yeah.
energy and the time, go look for that. The Sonic Cuda also in the chapter, whereabouts unknown.
Yeah, the Sonic Cuda is a car that it was again one of those sort of I wouldn't call them a dream car, but they were a concept prototype. Dream cars were more of those, like you said, those 50 style cars that made the show circuit back in the day. But this was a vehicle done by Chrysler for the intent of the show circuit, so to say. And I think the Sonic Cuda, there's rumblings that it still exists, but it's been in a private party's hands for a long time. And when you have a car like this, it's usually the people that find out about it are going to keep that information really close to their chest. So
right.
For new people to sort of go through the process and learn who has the car, it's valuable in the sense that it's information that a few people have that they're not sharing.
Yeah, it's kind of like searching for gold. Once you find it, you kind of go hush, go into secret. Now, many of the muscle car concepts were tied directly to racing, and you have a great story about the 69 Superbird concept, which is unaccounted for. It has the aerodynamics. It was based off the Charger Daytona and 500, and some very cool pictures. And everybody loves Superbirds. And you have some of the images of the very first sort of prototype.
Yeah, this was the first Plymouth Superbird, and lo and behold, it's a 69 model and not a 70. They had to have work done prior to luring Richard back from Ford, and that was the plan, was to put together a Roadrunner package that was the aerodynamic equivalent of the Dodge Charger Daytona. So it was at Creative Industries, another book we've done at CarTech on the history of creative industries, and one that I highly recommend you grab. But this car was brought in, and it still wears a lot of its 69 Roadrunner attire, as you can see in the photo. It's got the deep dish full wheel covers, which are very rare, actually, on a 69 Plymouth Roadrunner. A car of this nature, as you can see, the front clip's been removed, and it's got a clay model front clip, and you can see the back plug rear glass has been installed, and the rear spoiler, which looks pretty flimsy, and I think there's two different dimensions on it for the risers. But that car, could it have made it back into the public? I can't imagine the interior was touched at all. It was used just cosmetically for shaping the nose and whatnot. So if this car existed, likely they would have put the front fenders and nose back on the car and removed the spoiler and put some body plug holes where they made a mess,
right,
and probably clean up that rear back glass area and have it repainted up there. So if you ever come across a 69 Roadrunner with a 1970 Superbird rear window plug in it, I highly suggest raising a flag and having a closer look.
That's right. Contact CarTech Books and talk to Wes and make sure that he's the first to know if you find it. Well, you've mentioned the Marti report. Talk a little bit about what that is and what are the advantages of having something like that.
So if you have a Ford powered muscle car, Kevin Marti out of Marti Auto Works has the whole database of Ford cars available to him. I believe, each year he may add another year model of cars to it. But with this Marti report, Kevin has taken the information off the original invoice of the car. So the original invoice for this car is still secured via Ford Motor Company. And he takes that and he creates his own reports. And with it, it tells you when your car was serialized, when it was bucked, when it was actually built, and when it was actually sold. All very crucial information if you're retracing the history of your car. You may have the dealership name on there,
right?
And you may have heard it was just in Minnesota, but here's the dealership down in Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you a starting point, and all cars then get a starting point for carrying the story forward. Now, a Marti report would be really helpful for cars. You know, if you have a car that's an odd color or had some different options. So if this car was sold new in a small town in Alabama, you know, your starting point should be in that small town in Alabama.
Right.
Getting the word out to the public down there. Almost every town has a Facebook page nowadays. And just simply going onto their Facebook page and unloading all the information you have on your car could yield results.
Well, are there equivalents for GM and other manufacturers to the Marti report?
GM has their own version of it. It's way less information. They cater to, I believe, just the Camaro, Chevelle, Nova, and Corvette. I think it's to the National Corvette Restorer Society, and they have information that will tell you your original selling dealership.
Okay.
And I know they're not offering it for the Impala because my dad has tried already, and they haven't opened up that version of their base yet. But we through Chevrolet you can get a starting point from your original dealership.
Okay. Listen, I'm going to take a little break again. When we come back, we'll talk about other missing muscle cars and also some race cars with one local connection. His name's been mentioned a few times already here to the Philadelphia region, right after these messages on Car Smarts Radio.
Car Smarts listeners, convert your business or home to energy-saving, long-life LED lighting this month with eLED Lights, factory direct and locally manufactured LED lighting solutions. Shop at eledlights.com and enter Car Smarts at checkout to take 10% off your order. No lighting project is too big or too small. eLED Lights can help with project design, Pico rebates, and financing. That's eledlights.com and discount code CARSMARTS or call 215-355-7200.
I'm a tail-fin road locomotive from the days of cheap gasoline, and I'm for sale by the side of the road going nowhere. Rusty old American.
And welcome back to Car Smarts Radio. Hey, Wes, we're going to talk a little bit about, there's a kind of a famous, semi-famous racer in our area known as Bill Grumpy Jenkins. He had a 1968 Chevy 2 Nova, which I read in your book was actually a test mule for Chevy that was given to him. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Grumpy's Toys. Grumpy Jenkins, obviously, to your folks, is really one of the biggest icons in the history of door slamming muscle cars. I mean, he really is. And he had a series of cars that he labeled Grumpy's Toys, and one of them was this 68 Nova that he received from Chevrolet as sort of an under-the-table gift. Now, Chevrolet lured Grumpy away from Chrysler products. I believe it was in 66 or 67. And so by 68, Chevrolet had already been publicly known as having withdrawn from racing and altogether, whether it was drag racing or NASCAR, after I believe it was a 1963 season. So by 68, they were publicly not supporting drag racing, but they were doing things privately under the table, such as gifting cars to Mr. Jenkins or Ed Hedrick or other Chevrolet drag racers out there who, are ultimately selling Camaros and Novas and Chevelles for Chevrolet.
Right, and
Jenkins.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to say this one was particularly special, but had a 327, the L79, with a 4-speed Muncie transmission, and ran mid-11s at 123 miles an hour. It's incredible.
Yeah, this car ended up. Jenkins received that 327 from Chevrolet, and then updated it to a 68 L78 powered Nova. So it had that really. At that time, I believe for 68, there were only 667 L78 powered Novas built by Chevrolet. So he was really at the precipice of promoting that engine in that car for Chevrolet, and hence you see a large growth in sales for '69. I believe 7,000 396 Novas were built the next year. And a lot of that can be attributed to a guy like Grumpy Jenkins out there, kicking everybody's butt with the Nova. But for the most part, this was a car that a stablemate of his, Ed Hedrick, campaigned, and Ed, I believe, set some records with that car and ran some really low ETs at I believe, the U.S. Nationals with it. But in the story, we run through the car's ownership history and how the car became lost, sort of around 1971-ish. And the car, again, like we talked about, received a new paint job. It was now red with a black vinyl top as well. So a car like that could be restored back to a 327 Nova. It could be kept as a day 2 muscle car in that red paint scheme. And likely underneath all that, it's hiding Grumpy's original paint scheme.
No. And that reminds me that when you watch Barrett Jackson and some of these other auctions, you actually see tribute cars. So people will take, a 68 Chevy 2 Nova and do the paint up like the old race cars. And it's not the actual car, but they try to replicate it as best as possible. And they bring some good money on those auctions.
Tribute cars, especially when you're doing something that's either really popular, so a Grumpy's Toys car, or maybe one of the '68 Cobra Jet fastback race cars, they can bring sizable money above and beyond what their regular production counterpart would. You see that all the time with the 70 Hemi Cuda convertibles and 71 Hemi Cuda convertibles. These cars, they only made, I believe, 14 and 12, so like maybe 26 total cars. Well, out there today, there's hundreds of them. There's hundreds of Hemi Cuda convertibles right now. But again, most of those started life as a 340 or a 383, and if they would sell for, let's say, 70,000 at auction as a 340 or 383, when you transplant that Hemi into it, now you're talking 100 plus, 120, 130, 150 even sometimes for these tribute cars.
That's right. Are those? Does the VIN code for a Hemi on that, so you know whether you're getting a sort of a tribute car or an actual one of those rare Hemi Cuda convertibles?
It better say 383 in the VIN, because there's 340. If not, there's litigation that can be had if you're attempting to fool the next buyer of the vehicle, and that happens. I mean, we definitely come across cars that have been faked over the years, and legal battles have endured. It's a sad part of our hobby.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Ed Hedrick. He was a North Carolina native, but he has some Pennsylvania connection, as he drove the first Yenko SSE prepped Camaro. That's also featured in your book and also still missing.
Yeah, Hedrick's Camaro. Oh my! If there was ever a golden horseshoe out there, it would be that. It would sit atop the Yenko Camaro throne if that car would ever be uncovered. And again, in the story, we take the car through its ownership lineage, and that car, we believe, ended up in possibly some shady hands. And whether or not it made it through there or not, it's to be determined. But again, it's a car that likely could have ended up as a bracket race car down the road. You got to understand, a lot of these cars that are just drag race cars aren't insured, so they're not logging their VINs into databases. They're staying just race cars, uninsured, and not logged for usage on the roadway.
That's right, unregistered.
Correct. Sorry, that's the word.
You also talk about Hubert Platt, and you introduced me to his book, actually, written by his son. It's a great book. If you like the history of Ford drag racing, you got to get this book, also available at cartechbooks.com. But he introduced the Cobra Jet in 1968 at the AHRA Winter Nationals. 1 week later, 5 428 Cobra Jets raced at the NHRA Winter Nationals in Pomona, which is a great story in the book.
these are some special cars. These are the pre-135 cars. Now, 135 was the VIN designation. For the last 6 digits, there were a batch of 50 cars built. They all start with VIN 135 as their last 6 digits of the consecutive unit number. But Hubert had one of the cars before that. So he and I believe his Gas Ronda, Don Nicholson, Les Richter, Al Jonick, those guys all received these earlier cars, these test mules, so to say.
Right.
And I believe we cover in the book, Hubert did testing with that Cobra Jet Mustang, but they became, and there's an iconic photo of those guys all standing with their cars. And then when Ford re-debuted the Cobra Jet in 2008, all those members were still alive. They got them together and they redid that iconic photo with the 08 Cobra Jet. But yes, Hubert's car was, that was a car that ended up being wrecked at one point in time and repaired, and then ended up with a gentleman by the name of Rusty Gillis, who raced the car for a few years and was really successful with it. And he recalls, like I said, that car ended up in Florida, and the last time it was seen, it was sitting behind a service station.
Wow. Unbelievable. Listen, take a little break again, pay some bills, as they say. When we come back, we'll take Wes through the hot lap, a short NASCAR update with producer Mike, and we'll also learn about some celebrity muscle cars that are lost, and we'll talk about that right after these messages on Car Smarts Radio. Grundy Insurance, the inventors of Agreed Value Coverage, insured their first collector vehicle in 1947. Agreed Value policies indicate the amount that a policyholder will receive and an insurance company will pay in the event of a total loss or theft of a vehicle. There are no depreciation tools, mileage restrictions, or needed appraisals. Go online to www.grundy.com to learn how you can drive stress-free with Grundy Insurance.
Stick shifts and safety belts, bucket seats have all got to go when we're driving in the car. It makes my baby seem so far.
And welcome back to the show. Wes, I want to talk a little bit about some of the celebrity cars, because this is very interesting. One in particular got my attention, not only because it's a Trans Am, but also it came out of Livingston Pontiac in Woodland Hills, California. I used to live around the corner from Livingston. I don't know if they still have the sign that you have pictured in the book, but it did when I lived there, so it's pretty cool. It was owned by George Carlin. He bought a 70 Trans Am. Tell us a little bit about that car.
Yeah, George's brother was worked at that dealership, and he was able to help George secure this Trans Am, and I believe it's that classic blue and white paint scheme that you see on a lot of these cars, and through Pontiac Historic Society, I think we've narrowed it down that dealership sold three in that color combination. So that's the great part about having access to some of these bigger databases, whether it's the Pontiac Historic Society or the NCRS, or using Kevin Marty and using his Marty reports. You're able to zero in on some cars.
That's right, and I love the story in the book that he drove it to. He had a gig at the Ice House, which is a comedy place in Pasadena, California, and he parked it on the street instead of the parking lot, and it was sideswiped during his show. And it changed his attitude on materialism and maybe shaped some of his comedy going forward. But it's a kind of a big moment in his life that his favorite Trans Am got sideswiped. But that story also got me thinking about Sam Kinison, which is obviously not in the book because it's a later model, sort of a modern muscle car, 1989 Turbo Trans Am, that the whereabouts are that. And I traced just in my brief sort of detective work, found some conversation on a forum from 2010 that car may still be missing. It was a total wreck, obviously, when Sam was in an accident, but also a Trans Am, also a comedian, also in an accident. So it got me thinking about that car as well. You talk about James Gardner in the book, kind of a famous racer, but he had a 442 Grabber that he used for off-road events, which is interesting.
Yeah, Garner and both Steve McQueen were really active in automotive racing, and that's something you don't see much of today. I believe there was a guy on Grey's Anatomy that was doing some racing here not too long ago, but for back in the day, I mean, those guys really enjoyed whether it was Baja or road racing. And Garner's Grabber Oldsmobile was one of those cars that was it was off the grid for a long time, and a hobbyist was able to find that car. And getting back to your Trans Ams, it's pretty interesting. Even you're talking about Kennison's '89 Trans Am, lead singer of Alice in Chains, Lane Staley, had himself also a 1998 Trans Am, and that was a car after Lane had passed. A lot of people were looking for it, and it was actually sold through an auction site. And we were able to connect with the current owner of that car and see some new photos of it, which is pretty cool. So we use our Facebook page to find these cars, and what I mean is people like you, Steve, who had posted about your Trans Am on there. We put it on the top of the page, and then we let the people just start talking about the car. So if you're on Facebook, please jump on over to or keyword Lost Muscle Car and join the conversation. You could be the person with the right information to help somebody find their old car.
That's right. And of course there's a forum for every type of car, every subtype of car. It's amazing how much conversation is there. One more story before we take it to the hot lap. In 1964, Playboy began the tradition of giving a car to the Playmate of the Year. Well, Connie Kresge, who's pictured on the back of your book wisely, was given a 1969 Shelby GT 500 Mustang, and all the cars were painted pink that were given to the Playmates, and that car is still missing as well, I believe.
It is, yeah, and for 69 Shelbys, there's not a lot of racing pedigree with them, but for a standout car, this would be it. You know, a car that's a one-off paint color like this. We've heard rumblings that the car was white underneath that pink paint. So again, you know, take this to the middle 1970s, and you buy yourself a pink Mustang. Well, let's get rid of that.
Right.
let's go resell red, or maybe back to the original color. So, it could very well be Connie Kresge's, because the survival rate on Shelby's is quite high.
That's right.
That her car is still out there.
That's great. And again, pictured in the book, the whole story is there. That's Lost Muscle Cars, 45 stories of hunting the most elusive and valuable muscle cars, available at cartechbooks.com with a 25% off with SHOW19 as the code in checkout. Right now, we'll take you through the hot lap, a series of questions we ask every guest here on Car Smarts Radio. All right. First question is, what was your first car?
74 Chevy Nova.
Okay. Very good. Car you took your driving test in?
74 Chevy Nova. That's my first car. I still own it today. I've had it now over 26 or so years.
That's amazing. Car you sold that you most regret selling?
That would be the Boss Bronco. I was able to find that truck, and it was one of those deals where I had to take out a loan to purchase it. So
right.
It's in good hands and in a great collection.
You come across a lot of cars, obviously. Do you have a favorite TV or movie car?
TV or movie car? That's a great one. We could go back to Vanishing Point and talk about the Dodge Challenger on there, but James Garner, Burt Reynolds. Let's go back to Burt Reynolds, and I'm not going to go with the Trans Am. He actually ran in one of his earlier cop shows. He had himself a 1970 Shelby prototype.
No kidding.
A car that still survives to this day, but it was effectively known today as the Quarter Horse, one of two prototype Mustangs built.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. All right, final question. Money, no object. What's the dream car going in your garage?
Yeah, I'm not too greedy. I'm looking 69 Boss 302 in Wimbledon white.
Okay. All right.
That's an iconic body style, and I've always loved the way Larry Shinoda put that thing together.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I think people will thoroughly enjoy this book as well. It's Lost Muscle Cars, available by going to Car Smarts Radio or cartechbooks.com.